First and foremost, I just want to say thank you for attending this evening. This is our 10th of 10 forum options that we provided throughout the community the last several weeks. And again, we appreciate your attendance this evening, coming out. We do have some presentations, some information, open it up for questions, comments, and thoughts. And also we do have a survey that we'd ask each of you to take prior to leaving, or if you'd like to, the paper and pencil survey, take it home and either drop it back off, or we can come and grab that at a location as well. The reason we typically don't like to stand up on the stage, especially with a smaller group, but due to the fact that we are videotaping this, so we're going to place this forum and this process on the webpage so people can view it and see it in its entirety. That's why we're standing up here, and certainly you don't want to have this that's necessary separation, but in this case it's kind of necessary, so we apologize for that. This evening up on stage we do have Mr. Dan Conrad, Director of Secondary Education here at the district, and he will be providing some information, especially background, history, why we're in this position, why we're asking for the community to help us refine some options. Dan Channer from Structural Architecture and Brad Leeper from Envision are both here as well to be able to help provide any answers to questions that could be coming up as we continue to refine the options. This evening simply is a forum to help us decide the direction we're moving as a district. We're trying to narrow down a series of options, and really a multitude of options, based on what the community would like us to move forward with as a school district as we look at our facilities. So on the survey, we're going to ask for your feedback, the direction that you have, your thoughts, your wants, your wishes, your hopes, and what you believe strongly in as we move forward. From there, we'll refine some of that information and hopefully have a bond vote coming up this potential September, on September 9th. And as we move through this, again, I want to introduce Dan Conrad to come forward, and he's going to walk through really the background information on why we're here. There'll be about a 15 to 20 minute presentation. I'll talk through some of the options, which will be about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. As Andy said, I'm Dan Conrad. I'm the Director of Secondary Education for Cedar Falls Schools. I'm in my 14th year in the district, and so I've had an opportunity to see a lot of things happen over the last several years, and especially with our facilities. So Andy's asked me to kind of provide you with some background information, and so I'll try to do that. We really started this process about 2.5 to 3 years ago, and the focus at that time was really on a new high school. Do we need to build a new high school, or do we need to renovate the current high school? And that was really the focus of the entire discussion. Fortunately, at that time, our board decided to take a step back and say, you know, the high school isn't the only problem facility that we have in the school district. We have other facilities that still have some infrastructure needs and so forth. We've got other facilities that are overcrowded. So at that time, the board made a wise decision to look at our facilities pre-K-12 and not just focus on one individual building. And so with the board's help, we ended up working with a company called Estes Construction, which is out of Davenport, Iowa, and they help school districts all across the state develop plans for new buildings. In addition to them, we also employed the use of another consulting firm called Fielding Nair International that gave us a look beyond the state of Iowa, not only nationally but internationally, on what are some of the types of schools being built, what are some of the renovations that are happening across the country and beyond, for the type of learning that's happening in schools today and the type of learning that's going to be in schools tomorrow. So we've really been looking at working with those two companies for the last 1.5 years to determine what are some of the things that we need to look at, what are the things that we need to make sure we have in place as we put together what we want in a 10-year facility plan. And so when we did that, we basically asked them to help us looking at our educational goals and then matching our facility with those goals. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. We needed to have them have an understanding that our most recent enrollment study that occurred 1 year ago indicates that within the next 10 years, we're going to see an increase of about 900 students in our school district. And that has a huge impact on all of our buildings district-wide. And so we need to take those into consideration because we already have some schools that are hitting the limit and being overcrowded. We wanted them to then help us build some options or scenarios as to how can we address those problems as we move forward. And then lastly, we said, please help us then prioritize what those options are. What do we need to make sure that we're doing first, second, third, fourth down the road as we look at a 10-year facility plan. As they came in, they noticed a couple of things for us. And some of these were not surprises. Some of them were a little bit that we hadn't really thought about. The first one was, of course, we already have a lack of space. In some of our elementaries, we're already overcrowded. Those of you that might have kids at Lincoln Elementary realize that we just rebuilt Lincoln a few years ago, and we're already bursting at the seams. We have schools that have portables on them. We have other schools that just aren't large enough for the facilities for the students that we have. The second thing that they notice is that we still need to look at that alignment of what are our educational goals and how do that match our facilities. And I'll talk a little bit more about what are the types of learning that we're doing today and what the types of learning that we're going to be seeing over the next number of years, not only in our district but across the state and the nation, and we need facilities that will support that. Some of the other things that they noticed when they came in is they said, even though we have some pretty old buildings, we have done a pretty good job of maintaining those facilities. And that's a tribute to our custodial staff, our buildings and grounds people, and so forth, that the buildings look pretty good on the surface in a lot of ways. But things like plumbing and heating and wiring and all those kinds of infrastructure things are a lot of areas where we're really having some real struggles in many of our buildings. They also noticed that a lot of our furniture that we currently have in our classrooms are the same types of furniture that were back in the 1960s and 1950s, and that's kind of desks in rows. And that doesn't support and facilitate the kind of learning that's happening in our schools today. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And they also noticed we have at least 2 of our elementaries that we just haven't been able to do much to with our local option sales tax dollars. And so Orchard Hill and North Cedar Elementary still have lots of needs, especially on the infrastructure side. And then, of course, this building. They know that the high school it was built in the early 1950s. It's been added on several times. There's a lot of infrastructure issues here, and so we need to make sure that we address those issues as well. Even with some of our newer facilities and the ones that we've renovated, we've tried to create flexible spaces for small group learning, for project-based learning, and those kinds of things. But unfortunately, in some of those buildings, because of the number of students we now have, we've had to turn those flex spaces back into regular classrooms. So we need to think about how can we make sure that we have facilities and spaces in those facilities that will support that. And that's where Andy will talk a lot more about what those options will look like. And then the whole, just the space for the 21st century learning that's going on. So I'll show you a few of the pictures that we have and show you some things of how things could be as we work with Fielding and Nair and Estes Construction. These, if you can see these are 2 kind of very typical classrooms that we have right now in our district. Most of them have desks in them. Each student sits in a desk, and it's usually in rows. We do have some pockets of some facilities and some rooms in our buildings that are a little bit more conducive to the kinds of learning. On the left is a reading lab that we have at Holmes Junior High, and on the right, it's a little bit dark, but it's basically many of our classrooms now we're trying to outfit with tables and chairs as opposed to desks, because they can be easily moved, the classroom can be adapted, and so forth. This is an example of a flex space that we have created at Cedar Heights Elementary that allows for small group of students to work together, for a teacher or a paraeducator to pull out of the regular classroom and work together with students. And this works very, very well in a lot of cases. One of the downsides to it is the supervision that we have. But this is the kinds of spaces that we're trying to create. These are 2 of probably our I don't want to say our worst facilities, but our most in-need facilities. We kind of call these gymicafetoriums. because they triple as gyms, cafeterias, and auditoriums. And these both are located at Orchard Hill Elementary and North Cedar Elementary. And unfortunately, when we're serving lunch, we can't have phys ed class. And when they're trying to do an all-school assembly or a concert and so forth, they just can't fit people in there. On the positive side, we've been able to address these kinds of things at all of our other elementary buildings, but these are two buildings we have not yet. These are examples of some of the portables that we are now employing in a couple of our sites. This happens to be Orchard Hill Elementary. We currently have 4 portables that we're using there. Unfortunately, next year we're going to have to add 2 more. So we'll have a total of 6 portable classrooms at Orchard Hill next year, and we know that's not a great educational setting. So I'm not going to read this whole list, but these are the kinds of things when we talk about 21st century learning, these are the kinds of things that we're trying to do in classrooms. Small group work, collaborative spaces for those small group work, project-based learning, outdoor learning opportunities, all these kinds of things. We've asked them to help us match our facilities to make sure that we can continue to provide those kinds of multiple learning opportunities for our students. So Fielding and Air came and showed us a lot of ways this is being done across the nation and across the world. And a lot of it's just building spaces that are flexible. This is an example of some commons area where on the left-hand side, you've got a lot of students that are working either independently or in small groups. And then on the right side, you can turn that same space into a large group setting. So you could do some large group teaching as well. These are spaces within the building used for collaboration, where teachers can get together during the day and collaborate. And as we move down our professional learning communities initiative in our district, this is really important to us, to give that opportunity for teachers to have that collaborative time during the regular day. Project-based learning, I mentioned that earlier. We don't have a lot of space to be able to do these kinds of projects because you just can't do them in a regular classroom setting because of the space that's needed. These are some examples of how some of that flex space can be obtained and still be able to maintain some supervision and so forth. On the right-hand side, you see a couple of students working in a small group area, and there's a glass wall that separates them from the regular classroom. So those students can be working outside the classroom but still be supervised by a regular classroom teacher. On the left is another great example of that same type of a flex space. Again, it allows for students to be supervised while they're in a smaller group setting. This is the kind of furniture that we're moving towards, where things are soft and comfortable, they can be moved easily, they're light, and so forth, so you can create a lot of different learning spaces within a classroom. And then, of course, the outdoor learning piece is critical for us as well. And we, again, don't have a lot of space in a lot of our facilities to be able to create those. And then I've already mentioned the professional learning community having that space for teachers. So let me give you a little bit of history or background on some of our data, I guess, more than anything. I mentioned earlier that our enrollment study indicates we're going to see an increase of 900 students over the next 10 years. And you can see on this slide the breakdown of where that will occur in each of our elementary and junior high and high schools. The good news for us is that the big explosion of students at the high school especially will not probably occur for the next 4 or 5 years. So we have a little time before this building is going to be really get squeezed with the number of students that we have in there. This is a history of our general obligation bonds. In other words, the last time that we had gone to our community to ask for additional support for facilities was back in 1976 when the pools were built at Holmes and Peak. And then you can see before that when we had asked the community to support bond issues. Again, when you think about not only time but the cost of things now, if you look back in 1964, we built Holmes Junior High for $650,000. You can't even build a classroom for that almost anymore. So to put all that into perspective a little bit, one of the reasons that that our tax rate is lower than other school districts is because we don't have those general obligation bonds. And so as we looked at the largest 25 school districts in the state of Iowa in enrollment, we have the lowest tax rate of any of those top 25. At the same time, we are the 17th largest in enrollment, so we're kind of about in the middle somewhere in enrollment, but we have that lowest tax rate. And our current tax rate for this year is $12.82. And keep that in mind a little bit as we go through. The largest tax rate in the state right now of those 25 largest districts is Southeast Polk. And their tax rate this year is $21.66. The average tax rate of all of those 25 schools is $16.04. So when you think about our average, or our tax rate being $12.82, that's $3.21 less than the average. So keep that in mind in perspective as Andy talks about the costs of the options as we move forward and what that may do to our tax rate as we move forward. Okay, I think we're going to wait until we're finished with everything before questions. Is that what you wanted to do?
Sure.
Okay.
That'll be good.
So hold your questions, and then that way Andy has to answer all of them. So I'll let him have his mic next.
Okay, a couple different components that we're going to talk about is some of the options that are before you. And on your piece of paper that you have, it does list some of those options, and we'll really break some of those options down as we go through several of these slides. As Dan talked about, the fact that we are here because we know we have some needs as a district. We know we don't have the capacity nor the space to be able to handle the additional growth of student enrollment as we move into the future. And I think the last bullet here with those different points are some of the most important aspects that we need to communicate this evening. What we have before you are options, as I said earlier. Those options, we're looking for definition and our community's feedback on those next steps. What are we going to do as we move forward? And that's why we're doing the surveys, that's why we're having these forums, to really understand and gauge what is our community willing to support and willing to help us move forward with as a district. Fielding Nair and Estes, during their work and what we asked them to be able to focus in on, came up with really two main areas, capacity and building size. So they focused on the capacity of the buildings. How many students, based on those teaching stations, based on the number of classrooms, can we support in each of our buildings? And then number two, is that building large enough to be able to support the capacity and the number of students we believe should be there or could be in those buildings? Now, some of these numbers might be a little difficult to read, especially from the back, but this is all of our elementary schools. We have 6 elementaries. This is their building capacities right now, and we have a total number of student capacities or student seats in our elementaries of 3,000 students. Our current enrollment are these numbers, and right now we have a total number or student enrollment for our elementaries at 2,885, but our 10-year projected enrollment is intended to be at 3,165. So over our current enrollment and certainly over our building capacity. So at a bare minimum, Fielding, Nair, and Estes, during the work and the study that they undertook, said we need to have at least 2 sections at each grade level to be able to handle that 10-year capacity. That means 2 sections at kindergarten, 2 sections at first grade, 2 sections at second grade, all the way up to 6th grade at the elementary level to handle the enrollment that we're facing over the next 10 years. Our building size at our elementaries, average across the nation is 125 square foot per student to 140 square foot per student, and that is to accommodate not only the classroom spaces, the auxiliary spaces, but those 21st century spaces Dan talked about. The project-based spaces, the tinker spaces, the flexible areas for breakout, for differentiation, for our student learning. We have 2 buildings right now that do not fit underneath that average square foot, and that is North Cedar and Orchard Hill. They're at 92 and 99 square foot per student respectively. So at a bare minimum, we have to have additions at North Cedar and Orchard Hill, not necessarily to add capacity, but to bring those up to the square footage allotment, to bring those buildings into that national average. Junior high capacity. Both junior highs right now have a capacity of 750 students. Our current enrollment is well below that. Our projected 10-year enrollment is actually below the building capacity as well. About 1,400 students, 1,397 in a 10-year projected enrollment, underneath the 1,500 total capacity that we have. Our square footage allotment, once those buildings reach capacity, potentially 12 to 13 years down the road, will have about 150 and 151 square foot per student. The national averages are 145 and 165. Both Fielding Air and Estes said we may need small additions in 10 to 12 to 13 years at both Holmes and Peak due to the fact that both buildings have pools. And it's unusual that middle schools and junior highs have pools, so that square footage should be on the upper ranges nationally, and they'll start to feel tight 10, 12, 13 years down the road as we hit that capacity of the building. High school. Our current high school that we're in right now has total building capacity of 1,200 students. Our current enrollment is 1126. We know the 10-year projected is just shy of 1,400 students. Right now, we know that the square footage per student of our high school is about 175 square foot per student, with the national averages being around 200 to 225 square foot per student. So not only is our building not large enough to handle capacity, it's also small when you look at the overall square foot per student based on the national averages. So, Fielding Air and Estes came up with options. And they came up with other suggestions. And if you read the report or look at the report, they actually gave us recommendations. And their recommendations are really included in Plan B of the sheet in front of you. We'll talk about that more in depth here in a bit as well. As Dan talked about, they said our most pressing need is at our elementaries. We are going to reach our capacity at our elementaries very soon. Our high school is going to reach capacity probably in 2018-19 school year, so we have a little bit of time there, but again, that's coming very quickly for us. What Fielding Air and Estes talked about was that at our elementary schools, we need to have additions at North Cedar and Orchard Hill to be able to bring those up to the national square footage to have those spaces for 21st century learning. And then we need to add capacity. We have two options really to add capacity. Add additional capacity to an existing school, option A, and you'll see that's part of Plan A on your sheet that we're asking for feedback on. And then option B, they said you could build a new elementary school. And we'll dig in deeper into these options here in just a few minutes. Middle school, probably 10 to 12 to 13 years down the road, we may need small additions at both Holmes and Peak due to the fact that both have pools and they will feel tight once we reach that capacity space in our junior highs. The high school, truly we need to add additional capacity just for the number of students that are going to be coming through our doorways here in the next few years. Option A, which coincides with Plan A on the sheet, is add capacity and renovate the existing school. Plan B is to build a new high school. And then they dug deeper. Through their work, they worked with all of our administration, they worked with our facility committee, they worked with a lot of different entities to try to craft these plans and these options that we asked them to craft. They came out and said it is the district's desire to have pre-K in all of our elementary schools. Currently, we serve about 110 to 120 pre-K students in our school system in 3 of our elementary buildings. We turn away about 60 to 70 students every single year because we do not have the space to accommodate those students. There are 2 really main reasons why we've looked at having pre-K in all of our elementaries. Number 1, we think kids can transition quickly and smoothly if they have pre-K, move into kindergarten within those buildings. Number 2, we believe it's a convenience for our parents to have neighborhood pre-kindergarten in those buildings as well. And then the non-glitzy component of this plan, we know as we add close to 900 students within our school system, there are components that we need to be able to expand just to be able to serve those students in the ways we need to serve them. And that includes centralized kitchen to be able to help prep additional food, as well as the fact that we just don't have the space to accommodate additional buses, maintenance vehicles, auxiliary vehicles, as we look at serving 900 more students. So we need to do something with our central services. So, to dig deeper into the options, this is option A, coincides with Plan A again, add capacity in an existing school. We have 1 elementary building that we can add capacity to, and that is Orchard Hill. There's not another elementary, that has the land space or the ability to expand. And we could expand Orchard Hill from a 350 student elementary to a 625 student elementary. Now, the building capacity, current building capacity stays the same in each of these slides. The new capacity shifts depending on the number of students that we're serving, be it option A or option B, and this allows us to have a 3,275 new capacity. The 10-year projected enrollment stays the same, and then this number is probably the most important number on all the next slides, the bottom right-hand corner, and that's the difference between the 10-year projected enrollment and the current capacity, or the projected new capacity of our buildings, excuse me. So this number is 110. We would have 110 student seats above and beyond our projected 10-year enrollment. However, this slide does not include our pre-K numbers. So we currently serve about 110 to 120 pre-K student numbers. So in about 10 years, we know the difference if we just serve the current pre-K student population in our buildings would actually be 0. So considerations that Fielding Air talked to us about, they said, we may need to move off students temporarily off-site during construction. We know we need to have significant changes in boundary lines, and that's something that we always know is a difficult process to go through, but something that we know we'd have to go through. And then this does not accommodate the pre-K at all of our elementary buildings. We know probably within the next 10 to 11 years, potentially with Plan A, we need to look at portables, at least in some form or fashion in the future. Option B is to build a new elementary school. The recommendation that came before us from Estes and Fielding Air was that we build a new 3-section elementary that would be enough size to accommodate a capacity of 525 students. And you can see then the difference would be 360 students above the projected 10-year enrollment. Now, we back out the 110 to 120 students that we currently serve in pre-K, plus the 60, 70 we turn away every year. That difference would be about 180 students that we would have above and beyond our current 10-year projected enrollment. What that allows the district then to be able to explore is the space that frees up, not only for expansion and new students in the future, but also allows us to renovate potentially some of those unused spaces in other buildings into those 21st century flexible spaces, adaptable spaces, project-based spaces that might not be in the other elementaries. The other aspect within this, we know that the pre-K could be included in all the 7 elementaries because of that space allocation. This does require potentially that we may need to look at some additional redistricting and boundary line changes. However, the district did jointly purchase with the city 8 years ago property in the western section of the community off of the Meadows, off of Eric Road, where they just announced about 500 new lots to be designed and built upon for residential homes. In that area where that school could potentially be built, if that's the option so chosen by our community, it does touch 3 of these 4 district boundaries, and some of those boundary line shifts would actually mean that parents, families, would go to a new building, which is actually probably closer in a lot of different aspects than their current building. So we know that could be a little bit easier of a transition. High school option. Option A corresponds with Plan A on your sheet in front of you, and this is to renovate or expand this current building. Fielding Air and Estes came up with several considerations to consider. One of them that I did not think of prior to this work was we may need to move off all 1,200 students off-site temporarily, mainly due to the fact that our current parking lot would probably need to be a construction laydown site, and then we would not have room for portables or other aspects here on our site. We have to probably move those off-site one way or the other. Also, we know that one of the challenges, the site does not offer a lot of opportunity for growth in the future. Our current high school sits on about 17.5 acres of land. What most of the national experts will tell you is a high school should have about 40 acres of land, and then 1 acre for every 100 students. And if we have a 1,400 student high school, we should have in that 52 to 54 range acreage for a high school site. One of the aspects that is listed on your pros and cons of option A, to remodel, is the fact that if we do remodel this building, we may need to look at an eminent domain around this site just to be able to add additional parking and additional green space, because of the fact that right now we're crunched for parking with 100 or 1,150 students, let alone 1,400 students. That becomes a little bit more of a challenge. High school options, this was a plan that was created a few years ago by Envision, a tremendous plan to be able to look at how we could expand onto the high school and take away some of the spaces utilized between in and around our building. What they would say with this and what we've pointed out is because the building's been added on multiple times, there's some hallway challenges, some flow challenges. And you'll see here there are some interior hallways with interior classroom spaces that might not have access directly to the outside with limited space and limited flow with where those hallways are located at. Part of that plan, and again, very, very good plan with what everybody had to work with, came out to be roughly about 257 square feet per student, with, again, the averages across the nation being about 200 to 225 with all those 21st century educational components included. And when you look at that, that's roughly about 10 to 12% additional space then that you have to clean, heat, cool, and maintain over time. So, then looking at the options. And digging deeper into the options before you. I always have to grab my cheat sheet, so I apologize. You look at the different plans and components, and we'll go through these real quick. Within Plan A, we have three main components, and during the feedback, we're asking you to not necessarily say, here's the plan I like, which components of every plan do you like? That way you can say, I really like components of A, I don't like some components of B, I really like some components of C. But you can see in Plan A, we have remodel the current high school, bring that up to current square footage needs and to meet the needs of 1,400 students. Expand Orchard Hill into similar size as Hanson and Southdale, roughly 625 students. And then remodel and add additions to North Cedar. Underneath Plan B, you can see we have built a new 1,400 student high school, built a new 3-section elementary building, remodel and add additions, not to add capacity to go with North Cedar and Orchard Hill, but to bring those up into the national averages for square footage per student. Either work with, and we're currently having conversations with several entities in our community about potentially sharing some spaces, but dealing and focusing on the transportation center as well as our central kitchen to be able to handle the additional growth. The 21st century learning spaces in each of our remaining buildings, to be able to build those spaces into our additional buildings. Add preschool into each of the 7 elementary buildings. And then the last bullet, which I think is an important bullet, is potentially explore the repurposing of this building. One option is to utilize the current administrative building, sell that building, and have the administration move into this structure, and also sell a second building the district owns, which is called the Educational Services Building. It's located off of Cedar Heights Drive across from the AA, and that houses our technology, our alternative school, our behavioral intervention center, and have that building sold and have those programs moved down here as well. Wouldn't accommodate all the space in the high school, but it would accommodate a lot of square footage. The hope, I think, would be to continue to use the gymnasiums and the auditorium for civic use. Part of the building may need to be torn down as well because it's not utilized or won't be utilized efficiently or effectively in the future. And then Plan C includes several components that have been included in high schools across the state, across the nation, with recent high schools. Could include a new high school, a new pool, apologize, at the high school. It includes a small addition to both Holmes and Pete as those capacities become to the point where they feel tight. And then also potentially outdoor activity, practice facilities, which could include some of the amenities listed there. You can see on the bottom third the cost ranges. These are rough ranges for cost estimates. Potentially 79 to 90 million for Plan A. Cost range for Plan B to accommodate those aspects would be about 114 to 130 million. And then Plan C would be about 130 to 151 million. I won't read the pros and cons to you. We try to be transparent, open and honest with potential pros and cons of the plans. We do ask for your feedback on additional pros and cons that you might see so we can uncover anything that we've not thought of or our staff hasn't thought of. We took this out and presented all this information as well to our staff to help them refine what the options should look like, what their thoughts were prior to coming to our community. Then on the back side, the bottom third of the page talks about the tax rate implications. And you can see the tax rate implications for Plan A is about $3 to $3.35 per assessed thousand on a $100,000 home, and we used a $100,000 home as a multiplier. That way you can do the math if your home's valued higher than that. is roughly about $163 to $182 per year. The tax rate implications for Plan B would be about $390 to $405 per assessed thousand. On a $100,000 home, you can see roughly about $212 to $220 per year. And then the tax rate implications for the Plan C would be $4.05. That's the maximum amount that district can ask for. That has been done in Ankeny and Southeast Polk and Waukee and several growing districts. And the plus means that we need to look at our 1 cent sales tax dollars. We need to look at potential some donations and other aspects to accommodate everything within that plan. But on a $100,000 home, it would be $220 potential plus per year, and the plus means the additional use of donations or the 1 cent sales tax. Just as a reminder, as we walk through this, we always review our tax rate. One of the things I always talk to people about is that number, is the difference between us and average. We are actually going to drop our tax rate next year. We're going from 1282 down to 1278, which is positive, I believe. So we don't know exactly what the difference will be next year. But if you subtract the 1282 from the 1604, or vice versa, you actually come to 322. It's a rounding error. It actually comes out to 321, 44, something, something, something. So we did do the math correctly. If somebody's back there doing the math, we just wanted to reconfirm that with everybody. But we do know we have a lower tax rate from what everybody across the state typically has. And a lot of that's due to the fact that we do not have any bonded indebtedness that's based upon the property tax. Questions? A lot of information. The next phase is obviously we will bring the data back to the school board after we finish the community feedback. The bond election, we hope potentially will be in September. September 9th is what we're looking at. We do know Iowa code dictates when you can have a bond election. There's actually only 4 dates per year you can have that. And then if it does not pass, you have to have a 6-month waiting period before you can bring any kind of a bonded vote back to the public. So based on the 2015 dates, we would have to wait until June of 15 before we could bring back any kind of a bond question. Our hope is because of the process we're using, and we think it's a good process, we are not saying, here's our plan, vote on it. What we're trying to do is talk to the community and say, what do you believe is best for a plan, craft the dialogue and discussion, and then be able to craft what everybody believes is important to move forward, and have that be the ballot question, which we believe is going to be hopefully positive as we move forward. We do have a microphone up here. We didn't know how many people would be here this evening, but if you have questions, we'll try to get that to you so everybody can hear the question, and we will do our best to answer any and all. Just don't ask me to sing or dance.
Hi, Charlotte Lekowski. I have 3 kids in the Cedar Falls district, one's graduating, and then I have my youngest down in Hudson where I teach. 2 kind of related questions. I know there was a high school or a group looking for land for the high school back a couple of years, especially with the closing of the lab school. So that's kind of part of the question. The second question is, if second or third option, has there been discussion about actually making our middle school or junior highs just 7th and 8th grades? Yep. And shifting 9th grade up to high school?
Good questions, and 2 questions. The first question, land. Yes, we have worked with several different entities trying to pare down potential land. We're trying to wait and find out exactly which option we're going to be moving forward with. But we have had conversations with several civic-minded property owners that have said our preference would be to sell to the district because we think that would be a good plan and a good movement forward. But those are options. We also know that if we came out and said these are the 2 parcels of land that we're looking at, or 3 parcels of land that we're looking at, that will certainly drive the price up of those parcels of land. So right now we have options. What we can say is those options are going to be very accessible. They're going to be nice sized parcels of land that are going to be expandable for the future, and certainly very advantageous sites for a high school. Your second question is a question that comes up at most of the forums, and we're creating that frequently asked questions section. We asked Fielding Nair, and again, they're the kind of the international group that looks at school districts nationally and internationally, to be able to focus on that very same question. And we've come about that from an academic standpoint to say, academically, does it make a difference, grade alignment? The data that's out there, the studies that are out there, you can show both positive and negative aspects depending on the grade alignment, but most of them come back and say it's dependent on what happens in your classroom. Grade alignment doesn't have a huge significant effect on where you're at, even though most of them will show that what you provide, the resources that you have, and then the pedagogy is what drives student achievement. Fielding Nair came about it from a different standpoint. They talked about it from a financial standpoint. They said, based on the fact that elementaries have a square footage about 125 to 140 square foot per student, high schools range 200 to 225, to shift 400 students from what currently is in our elementaries, because typically junior highs or middle schools still have 3 grade sections, regardless if it's 7-9 or 6-8. If you shift those 400 students to the high school, based on the square footage needs and growth that you have to have, it's going to cost the district anywhere from $7 to $9 million to do that. And since our academic achievement is fairly high, we know we continue on to push and get better and raise those levels each and every day. They said your pedagogy, what happens in the classroom are the driving factor. The studies don't show the grade alignment is going to impact you positive or negative. If you shift that, we would recommend keeping it where it's at. We did ask them to look at what would the ramifications be just to have a separate K-12 building too, a one-section elementary moving up to K-12. And they, at that time, did the study. They looked at the cost analysis, and they said it doesn't make sense to have a separate K-12 building, which in essence would be a 25-student grade level building all the way through, with the high school then being roughly about 100 kids. They said for redundancies, for program challenges, it just didn't make sense. We also asked them what would it look like if we split and had 2 high schools. And had 2 separate high schools in our community, and they came back again and said redundancy and other cost factors didn't make sense to do that. You'd actually have 2 moderately sized 3A high schools. And for cost effectiveness and redundancy, it didn't make sense to do that.
Good evening. My name is Jeff Hassman. I have 4 students between junior high and high school. So a question just on the, I guess, mechanics of the bond issue. I assume that the board will put together, based on the feedback of this, some kind of a comprehensive proposal to put on the referendum for September 9th. So the question is, whatever the cost of that could be, so the referendum passes, does that, let's just round it up to, let's say it's $125 million is the total cost of that. Does that immediately, do you pull that whole bond down immediately? Or is it just the board now has the authority for that maximum amount and you pull that down as you need it, and therefore the impact of property taxes isn't, it doesn't hit us in 2015 or 2016? It's over time.
The answer is yes. Next question. Yeah. No, very good question. That's been asked several different times too. What that allows is us to, there will be a specific question, and what we can do is the work on that question. And it won't be one large bond issuance, it'll probably be multiple issuances, because there's something in the state of Iowa that's called arbitrage. And arbitrage means that you have to spend the money that you receive off a bond election within 3 years. If you don't spend that within 3 years, there's penalties associated with that. We cannot spend, potentially, if it's $120 million, within 3 years, due to the fact that we know the planning phases, the other bidding phases, the other aspects associated with any kind of work facility-wise takes time. The bidding then takes time. The actual pre-construction work and then construction work takes time. So we won't be able to spend all that money, so we'd have to do that over time. So the effect on property taxes will be varied. What we gave you is kind of the maximum worst case scenarios, and we base those on the fact that our current assessed valuation in Cedar Falls is a fixed amount, and we based it on that fixed amount. We anticipate, historically, our assessed value has gone up about 3 to 5% every single year across Cedar Falls, but we based on that fixed amount, because as property valuations go up, tax rate asking will go down, because what we're asking for is a fixed amount of dollars to be able to accommodate the potential options that we have before you, which ultimately means that fixed amount will be spread more fully across a larger tax valuation across the community. So what we've shared with you is kind of the higher amounts of tax valuation or tax rate implications, knowing that year 1, 2, and 3, it could be $1.05. Year 5, 6, and 7, if all the bonds are issued, it could be at that $3.42. But then probably year 6, 7, and 8, it should start going down again because of the fact that more valuations across our city. Does that answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So in addition to this, is assuming the current property tax base, so for example, in the neighborhood, now there's 500 additional houses, does that trigger the tax base and bring it down for the existing house?
No, that's always in 1 year in arrears, so we don't have those within the property valuation, nor is it on the fixed amount that those homes could be valued in the future. It's just based on that as agricultural land.
I have a couple of questions. My name is Kate Hall, last child graduating this year.
Congratulations to both of you guys.
Since teachers are the main users of these facilities, did you poll them first to see about, these various different classrooms, how they would like them, so forth?
With our facility plan, we went through and went through, with every single one of our buildings over very similar adaptation. There was a different presentation more geared towards our staff to be able to get their feedback or thoughts or ideas, what resonated with them, what they thought were areas of concern, and we did that in every one of our buildings in January and February, I believe. So, yes.
And then in these numbers that you cited, how many of these students are open enrolled? Or all those numbers, that's all Cedar Falls students?
Right now, the numbers that they projected were based both on our enrollment, basically what we call those our student served count, and that's we know that currently our open enrolled student population far exceeds our open enrolled out by the tune of, again, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers, by about 220 to 250 students. So that does include the anticipated effect that we'll continue to have more open enrolled students and open enrolled out, and we anticipate that continuing to climb in the future.
Okay, and then have you figured in all of the extra salaries for teachers, custodians, all of that? Is that included in this number, the upkeep of the buildings?
Well, not in the number that is on the sheet in front of you. That is simply construction work, renovation work. As we do all the budgetary aspects, and we have a tremendous Director of Business Affairs that continues to look at all those aspects. Obviously, the hope and the focus that you have as a district is that your student population is the revenue that funds all the programmatic costs within the district. And as enrollment increases, we know we need to add space and staff and all those other aspects. We know that there's a time and a point where the startup costs are going to have a 1 year expenditure that's going to be above and beyond, but the revenue, because of the additional students, and offsets the ongoing costs for the future. And it's the chicken or the egg scenario. It's something that we've talked philosophically about quite a bit. Do you wait until enrollment happens and you have an overwhelming crunch for space and capacity and then build, or do you build based on the assumptions and the work that's been done by a national firm, RSP, who did the enrollment projections now for 3 different years in the district, and know that we have 500 lots that are opening up, know that we have people that are interested in coming to our community, and then build those sites because you know it's going to happen. So either you don't build and you wait, or you do build based on the fact that you feel very comfortable that those enrollment projections are fairly accurate.
The lady pretty much answered my second question, although isn't it possible that even without, that you will not have the additional revenues from additional students, but you will have additional expenses? I mean, salaries and insurance and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. That, and again, it goes back to that chicken or the egg. When do you pull that trigger to make sure that you have the certainty that you have the capacity challenges and the enrollment growth versus the actual enrollment growth, and you are behind the game? Because we know if all of a sudden we have in their projected enrollments over the next several years, the additional students under elementary, if we wait 3 years and to see if that actually comes true, and then we will have really no space for students, and we know then a building design, construction, work, additions would be 2 to 3 years down the road, so actually we'd be behind probably 3, 4, 5, 6 years potentially within that enrollment growth.
I think you gave me the answer to my first question already, but I want to make sure I understood it.
Please.
Bottom line, Plan B, the $100,000 home, is that assessed value or taxable value after rollback?
That's the taxable value after rollback.
Okay. All right, well, I think that was, and also, I guess you gave the answer, I'll get it from somebody else, on what if there is cost overrun and it goes way beyond what you're projecting.
It actually comes out of our Director of Secondary Education's paycheck, so.
And what? Okay, well, that was the main thing. I wanted to know whether it was taxable value.
Yep, exactly. And one of the things that we built into this, and our architectural teams, I think, can help answer that too. I don't want to put them on the spot, but, you know, within those estimates, and they're really rough estimates right now, once we have an option, because we've not said, okay, if we remodel this high school, what are the programmatic aspects that we need to have in this building that could be renovated? Because we have not spent the time to do that. We're waiting for that feedback from our community. But we built in additional expenditure thresholds to make sure that we can stay within a framework that we feel fairly comfortable with. But again, that's the unknown. We build in some inflationary factors, we build in some of the unknowns with some other costs associated with time, waiting, knowing that it's more expensive to build tomorrow than it is today. I'm looking for confirmation, so sometimes I get lucky.
Terry Kestner, we've got children in Hanson and Holmes. You've talked about the overcrowding. Do those students bring tax dollars with them from their home districts? So in other words, it looks like we're having to build facilities to handle students from other districts.
Open enrollment, you're talking, with our students open enrolling in, yes, they do. What happens is every single student across the state, it's basically the funding formula and how it works in the state of Iowa, has an amount of money that we receive for each of those students. If we have a student that is living in Janesville, open enrolls to Cedar Falls, that dollar amount comes from Janesville to Cedar Falls to offset the cost of that student's education.
But it doesn't cover facility cost.
Not construction costs, no, but the ongoing cost for education, yes, because that's how, you know, we are a nonprofit. What we do is the cost of our heating and cooling, running our buses, educating our students, operating the buildings, are all part of that student per pupil allocation and cost to make sure that we are educating our students. So that money should be the amount of money that we spend to educate the kids.
Right, but the point that I'm trying to make is that you get money to take care of the operating side, but you don't get money to cover the facility side. So it's costing the taxpayers of Cedar Falls to add facilities to handle those open enrollment students.
Well, I would say yes and no. We know we have about 320 to 350 students open enrolled in. When you look at our overall population of about 5,200 students that we serve, that's a small percentage of the overall population. But we also know that when you're talking to build a facility, that's different from maintenance and an ongoing cost of the facility, because that student dollar amount should factor into all those. But when you're talking just construction, no. A parent that might live in, again, Hudson, that open enrolls their child here, we won't have the taxable valuation on their home to help pay for the building here, or construction or renovation here, but the dollar amount associated with that child will help and offset the cost to run and operate that building.
Then you've mentioned the need to repurpose this facility, meaning the high school, as a possibility under option 2,
Yes.
or plan B, whatever you want to call it. What are you looking at for cost? Because sometimes the cost to repurpose, renovate may very well exceed just to raise the facility and start over.
Right, and we've looked at just the portions of the building that we could occupy, and again, that's an option included within that framework. We've set aside money, I don't remember exactly how much, to be able to help offset the renovation costs. And then you hope the renovation costs and offset the heating and cooling costs. The other aspect within this building, there's a lot of square footage. We've talked to several entities to look at ways that we can partner to help fill some of those other empty spaces and offset some of those ongoing costs. But right now, we don't have firm numbers because we don't know whether or not that's going to be the option we move forward with from our community.
What's the payback period on the bonds?
20 years.
And maybe you've already answered this. How long from, if this bond gets approved on September 9th,
Yep.
how long till if a new high school was the option, how long from bond approval till completion of the high school?
I'll take a stab at this one too. Typically, it's about 9 months to 12 months for the planning process, getting all of our staff involved, making sure that we diligently look at all the space needs and allocation of space needs. The bidding process and construction process will be anywhere from probably 20 to 28 months, probably. So you're looking at occupancy from September 9th, 3 years out, potentially by the fall of 2017, fairly aggressively. Maybe winter break of 17-18 or in the summer of 18.
At Orchard. So just kind of looking between option A and B. Option A shows to expand Orchard Hill, make it a 625 capacity school.
Correct.
B is just saying add additions. Is that to accommodate the current number that's there, or what the school was designed to hold initially, or?
Yep, to have what it is designed to hold initially, which means that it would be brought up in, that's a good question, because it should say remodel and add addition, because the rest of the building would be remodeled. We have what we call a district standard to bring up rooms when we go through and remodel rooms to make sure that they, again, match our expectations for the learning that occurs in our classrooms. So it would be remodeled and added on to bring it up to that square footage allotment, which would typically mean one or the other, a new gym or a new cafeteria, to make sure that we can separate the gym and cafeteria, as Dan talked about, 21st century learning spaces to make sure that we have those flexible and adaptable spaces, and potentially some other classroom spaces, because again, we know we're tight on a lot of those different spaces, both at Orchard Hill and at North Cedar.
So that's taking into accommodation the number of students that are currently at that facility?
Well, the capacity of the building is intended to be about 350, and we're well above that with our portable classrooms that are there. So that would be to accommodate the building capacity as it was designed, that 350 range, but also knowing that we may need to add a few classrooms to bring that up, potentially into that 375 range, just because of that growth in that neighborhood, especially when you look north of, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank on my east-west road there.
Green Hill?
Thank you, Green Hill, thank you. Green Hill Road to the north of that. So, the hope would be to keep it at the current size and current capacity, but the square footage needs to grow to accommodate that capacity, because it's not large enough to handle even the building size it was intended to serve. Does that make sense?
Kind of. I mean, you're going to accommodate the number of students that it is currently serving.
You want to talk about
It-
the impact of the new building that
Yes.
It,
It currently serves about 420 students. The capacity is about 350, and that's why we have the portables that are there.
Yeah.
So with an addition, the intended outcome would be that it would serve the 350 to 375. But knowing that if that's the option we choose, the new building, which would actually be fairly close to Orchard Hill as the crow flies, would probably potentially take away on the western side some of the Orchard Hill boundary that adjoins where that school could be built at. So it would draw away some of those potential families on the far western side of Orchard Hill's boundary.
Okay. One other question. I don't know if this is anything the district has any say in, but has there been any considerations to moving the date at which students can start kindergarten back? I know we've switched to full-day kindergarten, and that's never been addressed or changed. I've been substitute teaching all year, seeing a lot of kids that are starting at age 4 clearly are not ready for kindergarten. Just curious if that's anything the district has control over, or if that's a national.
That's all based on Iowa code, and they have to be 5 years old by September 15th, sorry.
Yeah, and school's starting August 14th. I mean, we're starting with 4-year-olds.
We are for
You
the
know.
first month, exactly, and that's all based on Iowa code, and we can't come back and say, well, you can't start because,
Yeah.
so, yeah. Good questions.
I don't want to get off topic, but to follow up with what she just referenced, I think the error in our system with that is that our pre-K program that we have, if I get this right, you cannot enroll in it if you are 5 upon the start of school. So we're missing this whole group of kids that have summer birthdays, particularly if families can't afford, and recognizing that, boy, I have to send my kid to kindergarten because I can't pay for daycare. So possibly maybe with some of these facilities and looking at a pre-K, we can address that loop, those kids with those summer birthdays, and allow them to do the preschool.
You are 100% correct, and that's another crunch with the Iowa funding and Iowa code, that you don't get funded and you don't get to count any of those students in pre-K that are 5. One of the things that we know other districts have done, we've started to at least explore that option. How do we address that? Do you look at a transitional kindergarten program? Do you look at something else? We know we probably can't do that in every single elementary, but that's something that we've had some to have some discussions about. And that would help offset that. And then how does that look for curriculum and making sure that you get those transitional kids into the following year kindergarten to make sure that they are not so accelerated or they move into first grade. So that's something we can look at. It won't probably impact you because it won't be started next year, but it's something that we certainly look at. But that's a challenge.
I don't know if this is good, but I am the proud parent of 2 Cedar Falls graduates. I don't have any children in the school. They're actually both graduating from college on Sunday, so
Oh, congratulations again.
very, very happy with our Cedar Falls education. I think we have a responsibility to provide that education to our next generation of students. My question is, where do these 900 students come from?
That is,
Magically, they just...
we hope so, yes. We think, the magic wand. No, this was a study done by RSP, and it's the entire study. It's roughly 60, 70 pages long. It's on our website, and they are very scientific in nature as they go through this process to try to evaluate what enrollments would look like, and they do a high, a moderate, and low range. We took the moderate range. We didn't want to go high. We certainly didn't want to go low. You don't want to overplan. You don't want to underplan. You want to try to make sure that you're making the best decisions possible. We'll need to bring them back because this was before the announcement of those 500 new lots on the southwestern side of Cedar Falls. So probably within the next 8-10 months, we'll need to bring them back and say, okay, redo some of the estimates, look at the other aspects in our community. It looks like we're going to grow even potentially more than what we thought. They go through, again, that scientific process. They look at multiple factors and factors that I can't really talk to you about because it's something that I don't fully understand or necessarily comprehend in a lot of different ways. But they work with the city, they talk with the school district, they look at the birth rates, they look at the percentage of students that have retention for coming to a public school in Cedar Falls based on birth rates. They look at the land development and access. They look at the potential development sites that will be potential new companies and businesses coming to our community. And they look at all the different trend lines across the state as well as across the nation. And we know there's more urbanization, more suburban growth than there is smaller community growth, and so they factor all those in and they come out with those specific numbers based on what they believe will take place. So I don't have all the scientific background here for you, but they do this and that's all they do.
And then my other question is elementary schools. I know that there has been some research as to whether you're better off to have your sizing out. Do you want 350 student schools or do you want 625 student schools?
And I'm trying to see people, so I'm trying to get away from the light, shining it straight down. We have said as a district, 625 is the largest we'll go. That is too many, and I think this is your question. We know that as you grow larger with an elementary school, sometimes those relationship components, some of the other components can become much more difficult. So we have said, as a district several years ago, 625 is the largest we'll go. That's really about a 3 combination 4 section building, which means you'll have about 75 classmates, up to maybe 100 classmates in some grade sections, depending on the class sizes. No more. That's too large after we get to that point. Some districts have gone larger. We have chosen not to go any larger than 625, and that's why we capped Orchard Hill, if that's a choice, at 625, because we will not go larger than that. I feel bad, you've only heard my voice on answers. We can pass the mic around and have other people answer.
No, we like it just the way it is.
Other questions, please.
I've got a question on the option C.
Yes.
If an additional pool is added at the high school and additional athletic facilities, that kind of creates a redundancy with pools of the junior highs and then Robinson Dresser and whatnot. Would those go away?
That is something that's all kind of dependent on which direction we go. If we look at a new high school and there is a new pool there, by the time that is occupied, utilized, then we are going to be in excess of 40 plus years with the current pools at both homes and Pete. Typically the life cycle expenditures and expectations for pools are right around that 40, potentially maybe 50 years is what our experts have told us. We know we're either going to have a huge investment in funds into those 2 pools, or we're going to have to look at something different. If we do look at something different and we have a new pool potentially at a high school site, if that's the options chosen, we could potentially look at those pool sites at those buildings as actually the new academic spaces that we might have to have 10 to 12 to 13 years down the road.
And then as far as Robinson Dresser goes, would those facilities be moved to the high school grounds?
That could be one of the options, depending on where we go. That was obviously a donation that was first intended to the city, and then it was given to the school that then obviously was developed into ballparks. If that does happen and the community says that we would want that amenity at the high school site, we could move those there down the road, and we look at how else can we use that land for civic use, community use, to make sure that it's done in the interest and with the responsibility, with the intended gift that they outlined.
I have a couple questions. One is, do you have enough property at Orchard Hill and North Cedar for the additions? I know you acquired some for Orchard Hill.
Orchard Hill the simple answer is yes. We have, and again, I don't remember exactly the acreages there, but we own the land to the north, and in fact, the next house that's still there to the north, the district owns, and then the land in between, which will be a temporary parking lot this summer and into the next year as we utilize our portables as well as what the district owns. There's land to the west that can be utilized for additional building growth and building expanse, so yes, we do. The challenge is with North Cedar. To the north, we have a road. To the south, we have limited access as we butt up to the property. To the west, we have a road, and then to the east, there's a floodplain, a 500-year floodplain off to the east side of the building. And we know we have to replace square foot by square foot if we go into the floodplain. There are some opportunities there, some options there. We've talked with the city on some different options potentially to look at where we could move and add growth. Part of the expanse could be west or eastward because the building kind of comes out and then has another jog and there's some open space that we could build into. There is some room to the south, and there are options we can go up because up is easier to construct.
My other question is about repurposing this facility. The spaces that you mentioned in the Plan B, Option B, we'll take a portion of this, but there's a lot of unique spaces in this, and it seems like the option B would sell better if we have more commitments to what it could be. Otherwise, what happens to it? Is it gonna sit here and deteriorate, or what becomes of it?
Right, and those are the options that we put down, just to have that discussion, knowing that this is something that we have to address. And it comes down to, we know that as a district, one option would be we could fill in quite a bit of the academic space, but not all the space. We know that the older 3-section component of this building, right behind the auditorium, about 60 years old, that may have to come down just due to the fact of the infrastructure challenges that are associated with that. And that takes away several of the square footage allotments from the building. And then we've been in conversation with several different entities across the community. You have needs. Are there other things we can partner with? Are there other aspects that we can expand into? And there are. A lot of them have said, 3 to 4 years down the road, the picture could change if this building does become open in 2018. By the time we transition out of here, we might not be able to commit to anything right now, but we think we have some needs, not only now, but potentially in the future. So I wish I could say we would have a plan to fill every square footage with this entity, this entity, and this entity, but it's so unusual because of the fact that we're planning for something 4 years down the road.
I think the key would be is that we would be occupying this building. It's not going to sit empty, is the plan. So.
Most likely portions. And that's where the partnerships would have to be a very main component of that.
Basically, the front part of this whole building has been renovated since 2000. So that's the best part of the building is this part you're sitting in right now along this hallway.
All right, my kids attend Lincoln, so I'm just curious if you can tell me between, say, Plan A and Plan B, how the kids at Lincoln would be affected specifically by both of those options.
Well, Lincoln is one of our buildings that is overcrowded, in fact, fairly significantly. So regardless of which Plan A or B, it's going to allow more capacity into our district, which means that we're going to be able to have the opportunity to move more students around effectively, which is more dynamic and dramatic in option A or Plan A, due to the fact that we'll still continue to have 6 attendance centers and those boundaries will be drawn. And option B, a new space, means that, again, Lincoln is the one building, I believe, I'd go back and look at our attendance boundaries, that does not touch potentially a new site. Actually, it does. I apologize. And we'd be able to then reuse and reshift some of those students to make sure that that's brought back down into the capacity that the building was intended to be for. We've not had portables at Lincoln, but we've taken a lot of those 21st century spaces that the building had been built for and are now utilizing those as classrooms, as you well know.
When would the district lines change then? And would some of those kids from Lincoln be shifted like to Hanson? Because now Hanson's going to be a lot bigger.
That is all dependent on which plan and options we go forward with. That's something we haven't even sat down to really divest or talk about, due to the fact that, again, we need to know what options we're moving forward with as a district before we can even start to scope that out. And we'd have to bring back probably the enrollment experts to be able to say now, based on all the projections and new projections and where some of the boundary lines are currently at, what might have to shift and could shift. So that's really long-term discussions.
With the Plan A compared to Plan B, with A being mostly remodeling of both the high school and the 2 elementary schools, but then with Plan B, building a new high school, a new elementary, and then remodeling, can you kind of explain an understanding of what the time frame for all of those remodelings would be if you go with A compared to the building of the new buildings, or Plan B?
We've been looking at Dan again to see if I'm accurate on this. We know that the timeline for high school is much more dynamic and longer than elementary work. The hope would be potentially that we can do multiple projects at the same time. Part of that's going to be the scope and bidding process, a remodel job and additions to elementaries to add square footage growth, not capacity, can be done somewhat a little bit more fluidly. A new elementary would take a little bit longer to plan. A new high school would take significantly longer to plan. So the likelihood probably would be that we will move forward with some of the remodeling of our structures as we look at building a new elementary, as then we would look at building a new high school as we go through that timeline.
And can you give us any idea from the September 9th date of when remodeling
Oh.
may be projected that it would begin? I mean, would it be within that next school year? Or?
I'm looking at Dan right now to help try to answer that a little bit. That's yes, potentially. Right now, obviously, we're remodeling North Cedar classroom. We have 4 classrooms this summer. We have not put together the exact plan because we don't know exactly the direction we're moving as a district with this. But we're asking for that feedback. But I know we have some tentative timelines and trying to decide how much work is too much work to do all at once. So do we segment those remodel out so we don't have to move all 280 students, 300 students out of North Cedar to be able to do a full-fledged remodel, or do we do them, as we go through with the classrooms, and what can we do maybe during the summer, what can we do at North Cedar or Orchard Hill this summer, or do we just come in and do it all at once? And we haven't mapped out all those yet because, again, we don't know which options we're going to move forward with. But we've had talks. It's just a matter of counterbalancing them to make sure that everything's done the right way with minimal disruptions to students in their academic time, so we can make sure that we're educating them appropriately.
And do you have plans of what the displacement of children at both Orchard Hill and North Cedar would potentially be? I mean, with Lincoln being closest to North Cedar and they're bursting at the seams, obviously that's not an option.
Yeah, not yet, and the hope would be to minimize those disruptions as we added on, remodeled Hanson, for instance. We didn't move students off-site, but there's some challenges associated with that, and you have to do that through planning, you have to do that strategically, you have to do that sometimes with portables. So we're trying to judge what is the best options, because there's multiple options you can use to be able to finalize that. And we just don't have that detailed out right now, so because we're waiting, again, on the community feedback. I wish we did, but we just don't have all the answers to everything.
Have you looked at the opportunity of other existing facilities in this community and say it a little tongue in cheek, but we've got a mall sitting pretty empty that could be all on one level and it would prevent rebuilding and all that stuff. And have you also looked at moving the administrative offices to the new facility, new high school, and completely shutting down all of these other buildings that you've got? Because it looks to me like the operating cost in this thing's still going to be pretty high.
Operating costs, anytime you run an operating building, is high, and that's something we can explore with the potential, what would that look like with central administration potentially in the structure. We'll have to look at that. The other question that you had, yes, we have, but some of that, when we looked at other property, you mentioned the mall. Actually, we did look at the mall just to say what if, and the assessed valuation of that mall area with only about 40 acres is about $30 million. It's something that we know is probably not conducive due to the fact that we have to tear up so much of the parking lot. That would mean that most of those businesses on that 40 or that 30, right around 30 acres, 45 acres, 40 acres. I'm sorry, I'm looking at Doug, he's videotaping this. When we looked at this several weeks ago, includes a lot of the businesses right along the university too. So if you exclude those businesses, that land reduces considerably, which is just not conducive necessarily to a high school because the site wouldn't be large enough. So it's the cost, the displacement of potential businesses, the renovation costs just start to become so dynamic that location didn't work. We looked at a couple other spots, and again, just for feasibility, location, square footage, size that we need. It's just there's not that current structure that would work. We try to put thought into this and try to look at everything through multiple lenses, and that's a challenge. Okay, we are going to hand out a survey. It's a paper and pencil survey. You do not have to stay and fill it out here. If you'd like to drop that off some other time. I think Janelle's helping to pass that out, as well as Pam and Dan. Again, thank you so much for coming. If there's other questions that come to you at any time, don't hesitate to call me. Don't hesitate to drop me an email. Don't hesitate to stop in and see me. We